Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to southern India
Okay.
between 300 and 1200 CE.
All right.
And we've got a lot of research here on how their cities were organized and run. I think it's going to be a fascinating deep dive. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. This is a period that really challenges, some of our assumptions about how power worked in the ancient world. I mean, we tend to think of kings and emperors making all the decisions, but in southern India, you see local communities wielding a surprising amount of influence.
So not exactly a top-down system, huh?
Not at all.
What was it about southern India that made it so different? Were there specific events or changes that kind of led to this emphasis on local control?
Well, you have to consider the context, right? Southern India was undergoing a pretty major shift from rural life to more complex urban centers.
Hmm.
As trade flourished and specialized crafts emerged, these cities just exploded. They became real hubs of activity, attracting people from all over. So naturally, all this growth needed some sort of organization. But instead of relying solely on, royal decrees or anything like that, they developed these really interesting systems where local councils, assemblies, even guilds had a say in how things were run.
So it's more like a bottom-up approach to governance,
Mm,
driven by the needs of these burgeoning cities.
exactly.
That's really interesting. But before we get too deep into the how, I'm kind of curious about the what. Like, what did these southern Indian cities actually look like? Can you paint us a picture?
All right, so picture this. Bustling marketplaces, right? Filled with goods from all across the Indian Ocean. You have imposing temples dedicated to various deities, and then this network of streets that are lined with homes and workshops.
Wow.
And you've got all these people, right? Merchants, artisans, priests, scholars, all living and working together in this vibrant mix. It wasn't just grand palaces and monuments. It was a real tapestry of life.
Okay. I'm starting to get a feel for it.
Good.
But with so many different groups,
Yeah.
and all this activity, how did they keep things running smoothly? I mean, what were some of those innovations in local governance that you mentioned?
Well, one of the key concepts was the idea of local councils. Now, these weren't elected bodies like we might think of today. They were often made up of prominent families, heads of guilds, or just respected elders in the community. They had the authority to resolve disputes, collect taxes, maintain public works, even influence the king's policies at times.
Wait, hold on. Influence the king's policies. So these local councils weren't just managing like day-to-day life.
Yeah.
They had some real political power.
Oh, absolutely. They had clout.
Mhm.
For a king to rule effectively, he needed the cooperation of these local power centers, right? So it was this delicate balance, a kind of give and take relationship. The king provided overall stability and protection, but the local councils were the ones who ensured things ran smoothly at the ground level.
It sounds like a much more collaborative system than we might imagine. But wouldn't there have been conflict sometimes? I mean, what happened when the king's priorities clashed with, what the local council wanted?
Oh, there were definitely tensions. You can imagine a scenario where a king wants to raise taxes, right, to fund a military campaign. The local council, knowing this is going to burden their citizens, they might push back. They might negotiate for a more reasonable solution.
Hmm.
Sometimes this was done through formal channels, but there's also evidence of, let's say, more creative methods of protest.
Creative methods. Now you have to tell me more about this.
Well, some inscriptions from that period tell of everything from boycotts to, strategically timed religious festivals that would just disrupt the king's plans.
Wow.
They didn't always confront him directly, but they certainly knew how to make their displeasure known.
That's amazing. It's like they had this real knack for navigating those power dynamics.
Yeah.
But, with all this talk of councils and kings and all that, what about the everyday people? How did this all play out in their lives?
Well, that's where the concept of community traditions really comes in. These weren't just, written laws. They were deeply ingrained customs and practices that shaped how people interacted and solved problems.
Okay.
They had established ways to resolve disputes amongst themselves, ways to maintain public spaces, even organize large-scale projects like irrigation systems. These traditions weren't just about following rules. They were about ensuring the well-being of the entire community.
I'm really intrigued by this idea of community traditions as a form of governance. It's a very different mindset from how we often think about organizing society today. Can you give me an example of how these traditions worked in practice?
Sure. Let's take the example of water management, which was, absolutely crucial in a largely agricultural society. Many communities had these elaborate systems of tanks and canals, right, to collect and distribute water.
Mhm.
And the upkeep of these systems, it wasn't just a government task, it was a community effort. Everyone pitched in based on their means and abilities.
So it was about shared responsibility.
Exactly. It was a system built on that, a shared responsibility, and a deep understanding of their local environment.
This is fascinating. It's like they had this built-in system of sustainability where everyone had a stake in making sure the community thrived in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But this was all happening within the context of, powerful kingdoms, right?
Right. Right.
How did these local governance systems vary across different regions?
Uh,
Were there any distinct patterns or innovations that you noticed?
That's where it gets really interesting. Southern India wasn't this monolithic entity.
Right.
You had the Cholas with their powerful navy controlling trade routes. You had the Chalukyas, known for their grand temples and rock-cut architecture. And then the Pallavas with their own unique artistic traditions. Each region had its own, its own flavor, its own way of doing things.
Okay, so we've got these bustling cities, these innovative administrative systems and strong community traditions, all kind of shaping life in southern India. But I'm curious, with all this focus on local control, did they ever face any pushback from the larger kingdoms they were a part of? Was there ever a struggle between like local autonomy and central authority?
That's a great question. And that takes us right to the heart of why this period is so fascinating. While these systems flourished within kingdoms, they weren't immune to the influence of broader political events. Sometimes kingdoms would try to exert more control, which led to some tensions with local communities.
Can you give us a sense of what those tensions looked like? Was it like all-out rebellion or something more subtle?
It really depended on the circumstances. Sometimes it was a matter of negotiating compromises, finding ways to accommodate both local interests and the king's demands. Other times it was more about subtle resistance, finding creative ways to push back against policies they didn't agree with.
So it sounds like Southern Indian society during this period was incredibly dynamic,
It was.
with this kind of push and pull between different, levels of power.
Definitely.
It wasn't just kings issuing decrees from on high. There was real negotiation and compromise happening.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying this era so rewarding. It breaks free from those simplistic narratives we often have about ancient history. It shows us a society where power was much more distributed and where local communities had a real voice.
I love that. A society where power was distributed.
Yeah,
It really flips the script on how we typically think of ancient civilizations.
for sure.
But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the people who actually lived in these cities.
Okay.
We've focused a lot on, systems of governance and all that. But what about the daily lives of just ordinary people? Did everyone benefit equally from this kind of this flourishing urban environment? Or were there also, disparities and challenges?
That's a crucial question and one that historians are still piecing together. While we have these glimpses into daily life through inscriptions, archaeological finds, literature, it's clear that life in these cities was both vibrant and complex.
Okay.
We see evidence of, a diverse social fabric with people from all different backgrounds, occupations, religious beliefs, all interacting in these urban spaces.
So it wasn't a homogenous society, but a real kind of melting pot of cultures and identities.
Exactly.
That makes sense, given all the trade and cultural exchange that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But did everyone share equally in the prosperity? I imagine there must have been, hierarchies and inequalities too.
You're absolutely right. While some individuals and groups definitely flourished in this urban environment, others likely faced challenges. The caste system, that deeply ingrained social hierarchy, definitely influenced people's lives and opportunities.
Yeah.
We also see, evidence of occupational specialization, with some professions holding higher status or earning greater rewards than others. And as with any growing city, there were probably those who struggled to make ends meet or found themselves kind of marginalized.
It's a good reminder that even in, societies that seem so successful and innovative on the surface,
Yeah.
there are always these complexities and challenges
Yeah.
up beneath the surface.
Right.
So we can't romanticize the past,
Right.
but we can certainly learn from both its, triumphs and its shortcomings.
Absolutely.
So how did these southern Indian cities grapple with those challenges?
Yeah.
Did their systems of local governance, and these community traditions offer any solutions or any kind of support for those who were struggling?
That's where the importance of these community traditions really comes into focus. While they didn't, erase social hierarchies or solve all of society's problems, they did provide a framework for addressing challenges and supporting those in need. For example, many communities had systems of like mutual aid and charity, where wealthier individuals or groups were expected to contribute to the welfare of the less fortunate.
Mm.
Guilds and other occupational organizations often provided support for their members,
Yeah.
whether through shared resources, training opportunities, or even just in times of illness or hardship.
So there was a strong emphasis on collective responsibility.
Exactly. It was a system that really understood that the well-being of the community depended on the well-being of all its members.
It's almost like a built-in safety net, although I'm sure it wasn't perfect.
Precisely. And while it had its limits, right, and couldn't erase all forms of inequality,
Of course.
it did offer a level of support and resilience that might surprise us today.
We've talked about, the physical layout of these cities, the marketplaces and the temples and the homes. But what about the intellectual and cultural life? Was there a thriving scene for like art, literature, philosophical debate?
Oh, absolutely. This period witnessed a remarkable flourishing of culture and intellectual life, and much of it was centered in these dynamic cities. Think
Yeah.
about, magnificent temples adorned with intricate sculptures and paintings, bustling marketplaces where ideas were exchanged alongside goods, and then these lively debates between scholars and philosophers
Uh-huh.
exploring, profound questions about spirituality, ethics, the nature of reality.
It sounds like a real renaissance of art, culture, and thought. Can you give us some specific examples of what this looked like in practice? What were some of the key artistic movements, literary works, or philosophical schools that emerged during this time?
One of the most vibrant expressions of this cultural flowering was the Bhakti movement, a devotional form of Hinduism that really emphasized a personal connection with the divine. Poets and saints like the Alvars and Nayanmars composed these soul-stirring hymns and songs in the Tamil language, attracting a wide following and really transforming the religious landscape of the region.
Hmm.
And their works weren't just confined to temples or, scholarly circles. They were sung in the streets, shared in homes, and really became an integral part of the cultural fabric.
So the Bhakti movement wasn't just a religious phenomenon.
Right.
It was a social and cultural force
Exactly.
that really helped to shape the identity of these cities.
For sure.
And you mentioned that their works were in the Tamil language. Does that mean we see a rise in regional languages and literature during this time?
Absolutely. While Sanskrit remained, an important language for scholarship and religious texts, this period also saw a flourishing of literature in these regional languages like Tamil, Kannada, and Telugu.
Interesting.
It's a reflection of that cultural dynamism we've been talking about. For example, the Silapadikaram, this epic Tamil poem, tells this tragic love story. But it also provides really insightful commentary on social customs, justice, even the role of the king. It's a window into the values and concerns of that society. And of course, we can't forget about the incredible architectural achievements, like the breathtaking Brihadiswar Temple. Just a testament to the skill and artistry of Chola architects and sculptors.
It's amazing to think about how these grand temples, these intricate sculptures, they weren't just expressions of religious devotion, but they also showcase the intellectual and artistic achievements of these societies.
Right.
It all paints this picture of southern India as a place where local communities, artistic expression, and these innovative governance structures, they all came together to create something truly unique.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, we've been talking about this period as a time of flourishing, but how did these cities interact with the wider world?
That's a question that leads us to the next chapter of our deep dive. When we think about globalization, we often imagine it as a modern phenomenon.
Right.
But southern India during this period was already deeply connected to the wider world through trade, diplomacy, the exchange of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
These interactions weren't always, smooth sailing. There were tensions and conflicts. But what's remarkable is how these cities absorbed these new influences, adapting them to fit their existing cultural framework.
So they weren't just passively receiving these external forces. They
Uh-huh.
were actively shaping and integrating them into their own societies.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the end of part 2 of our deep dive. We left off talking about, southern India's connections to the wider world. I'm ready to dive deeper into that. Can you give us a sense of how this ancient globalization, so to speak, kind of manifested in the daily lives of these southern Indian cities?
Yeah, think about the arrival of new religions like
Hmm.
Islam, carried by traders across the Arabian Sea. You would find mosques being built alongside Hindu temples.
Wow.
And you'd see these communities of different faiths not just coexisting, but actually collaborating in, commercial ventures.
So it was a real mix.
It was. It wasn't always, smooth sailing, of course. There were tensions and conflicts.
Right.
But what's remarkable is how these cities absorbed these new influences, adapting them to fit their existing cultural frameworks.
So it was a two-way street. They
Yeah,
weren't just, passively receiving these external forces. They were actively shaping and integrating them into their own societies.
exactly.
What stands out to you as a particularly vivid example of this?
Well, you could look at these bustling port cities like Quilon,
Well,
which was this major hub for trade with Arab merchants.
hmm.
And you would see the influence of Persian art and architecture blending with local styles like in their temples and palaces,
Hmm.
creating something uniquely beautiful.
Yeah.
And this cultural exchange wasn't limited to, to just material things. The arrival of new ideas and philosophies really sparked some lively intellectual debates
Okay.
and led to a reexamination of their existing beliefs and practices.
That's fascinating. It really highlights the dynamism and the openness of these cities. They're really at the crossroads of different cultures and ideas, constantly evolving and
Right, yeah,
adapting.
for sure.
But I'm also curious about the flip side of this.
Okay.
Did this openness ever lead to, you know, challenges or conflicts? And if so, how did they navigate those situations?
That's a great question. Of course, not all interactions were, completely harmonious.
Right.
There were instances of, religious tensions, trade disputes, even military conflicts. But what's striking is how these cities often found ways to manage these challenges through, diplomacy, negotiation, and a really pragmatic approach to problem solving. They understood that maintaining trade and good relations was often in everyone's best interest.
So they were skilled at finding practical solutions,
Yeah,
even when faced with, cultural and religious differences.
absolutely.
That sounds like a valuable lesson for us today.
I think so.
But, we've been focusing on this period as this time of flourishing and growth, but what ultimately led to the decline of these vibrant cities?
Well, that's a complex question, and there's
Mhm.
really no single answer that applies to every city. Some faced a gradual decline, maybe due to shifts in trade routes or economic downturns.
Oh, yeah.
Others succumbed to invasions or internal conflicts. But I think what's important to remember is that decline is just as much a part of history as rise and flourishing.
That's a good point. We often focus on the peaks of civilizations, but understanding their decline can be just as illuminating. So
Exactly.
even as these cities eventually, faded from their peak, what legacy did they leave behind?
Well, they left behind this remarkable legacy of innovation, resilience, and cultural richness that
Mhm.
continues to inspire us today. I think their unique approach to governance, their deep-rooted community traditions, and their openness to new ideas. They offer valuable insights for us as we navigate the complexities of our own globalized world.
It's striking how much we can learn from these ancient cities. Their
Hmm.
story reminds us of the importance of community, the power of adaptation, and this enduring human spirit that seeks to build and create and find ways to flourish even amidst all the uncertainty.
Beautifully put. And that's precisely why we deep dive, isn't it? Not just to learn about the past, but to, find inspiration and insights that can guide us
Yeah.
in navigating the present and shaping a better future.
It's been an incredible journey through time, exploring these dynamic cities and these remarkably effective governance systems of southern India. We uncovered a story of resilience, innovation, and the enduring power of community. We glimpsed a world where globalization wasn't a modern invention, but a lived reality. But just like those bustling marketplaces we talked about, our exploration doesn't have to end here. There's always more to discover, more to learn, and more to ponder about. Human history is just incredible diversity and complexity. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.